Now, the head of Iran's judiciary has warned that those behind a recent wave of anti-government protests could expect punishment without the slightest leniency. What began earlier this month as demonstrations against the high cost of living boiled over into a broader protest movement. The Iranian government has put the death toll from the protests at over 3,000, including over 2,000 it has labeled martyrs. Rights groups, however, have said protesters account for the vast majority of the deaths, documenting several thousand killed. The Norway-based NGO Iran Human Rights has said that the final figure could top 25,000. Rights groups say security forces used internet blackout as cover for the violent crackdown. Disturbing video footage has emerged from the morgue of Ashayed Hospital, Khorramabad, revealing the horrifying scale of the violence carried out by Iran's regime. People killed in the protests are being tightly packed in spaces far beyond the morgue's usual capacity. The U.S. president has repeatedly warned of possible military strikes against Iran in response to the violence and appeared to have softened that stance. However, on Thursday, he told reporters on the way back from Davos that the United States was nonetheless sending a massive fleet towards Iran just in case. Now, France says military intervention in Iran is not its preferred option, following reports of deadly response to nationwide protests. France's Armed Forces Minister Alice Rufo said Paris believes the international community should support the Iranian people, but stressed that any change must come from within. Now, she said it is up to Iranians themselves to determine their future and choose their leaders. The minister also said documenting mass crimes by Iranian authorities has been extremely difficult because of widespread internet shutdown. Indian airline, meanwhile, Indigo, has cancelled flights to several destinations in the region, citing safety concerns linked to the situation in Iran. The airline said it is closely monitoring regional developments and has suspended services to Tbilisi, Almaty, Tashkent, and Baku through January 28th. Indigo stressed that passenger and crew safety remains its top priority. Well, to get more insights on this, we're now being joined by Berzin Wagner, live from Mumbai. He is a research fellow at the Center for Iranian Studies at SOAS, University of London. Thank you so much for joining us. What we know right now is many countries are being cautious. France has clearly denied any action militarily. And of course, India is also being cautious about its flights there. How tense do you think the situation has become as of now?
The situation is now grim since Mr. Trump, I would hazard, could order a limited strike, given that the USS Lincoln has sailed from the Indo-PACOM area towards CENTCOM, the Persian Gulf, and it's in silent transponder mode. So it is not communicating. It's not communicating even with its escorts as such. The move could be a flex by Mr. Trump. That is quite evident. But the point is, Iran has, as usual, made its saber-rattling threats that they would attack the Nimitz-class carrier and they would attack U.S. personnel elsewhere across the Persian Gulf, including bases such as the Fifth Fleet in Manama, Bahrain, or the Al Udeid base, and among other bases. That's all very well, but the point is, Khamenei will not relent, although there may be back-channel talks between D.C. and Tehran going on as we speak. It's just that Mr. Trump may order a limited strike, but my point would be that it would achieve precious little and not tangible, substantial results that one would want to see a change in the dispensation of the Iranian regime, especially towards its own population, which is dying.
Right. And Trump has, of course, claimed to solving any kind of conflicts. He has his own board of peace, so to say. And when you look at what he had warned was that if people are killed, the protesters are killed in Iran, he will take military action. The head of Iran's judiciary has now warned that those behind this recent wave of anti-government protests can expect punishment without the slightest leniency. Do you think that's the time that Trump will react, and is a military action very possible?
Well, if the Iranian rhetoric is kept up at that tone and tenor, then Mr. Trump might, lose his cool, because he does tend to do that. And he tends to be impulsive and work on what is the latest put in front of him as such. He's not given to long-term thinking. We do know that as such. And if news reaches him that Iranian protesters hospitalized have been dragged out of beds for judicial sentences, which incidentally is taking place as we speak, and if that comes to his notice, and this is just one salient example I adduce, then you can be sure that Mr. Trump will lose his cool and may want to take some kinetic action. But as I mentioned, the problem is limited strikes, spectacular strikes may not necessarily lead to what Iranians would envisage as a better governance or a change for the better, just as in Venezuela, where the Chavistas are still at the helms. So there has been no structural change for the better for Venezuelans. So Iranians themselves would be despondent about that. But having said that, it must necessarily be also stated that at least Mr. Trump has the gumption to take on Iran, considering that the Europeans are impotent enough not to confront Tehran over its atrocities, which are now well in the 5-digit mark of fatalities that have taken place, which crosses even the Tiananmen Square massacre of June 89 in China, the Arab Spring crackdowns, and the rest. So, and the Europeans have not even done the basic as such. Paris and Emmanuel Macron's government, of course, talks for a soft peddling approach, but then Paris is so closely tied with economic deals with Iran. So that's only natural for the French to talk like that. And the British are too coy about it, likewise the Germans. But they could at least say something besides putting out blandishments, urging the Iranian government to respect its own population's right to assembly and peaceful protest. They've done nothing beyond that.
And you, of course, I was going to come to that because Paris has clearly said the military response is not ideal. But then we do see some, protests in Europe itself, in Berlin, and different parts of Europe. Apart from that, you talked about regime change. If that is the goal, when Paris says that, it is the Iranians that need to bring about a change, that's their response to that. And considering the fact right now, if it's not Khamenei, we know that some reports do say that he's gone into hiding and his son has now taken over. It clearly does not seem that there is any chance of regime change, is there?
No, you're right to point that out. I would concur that immediate regime change is not on the cards. The regime is strong as we speak, though it's embattled and beleaguered. It is hatchets down in Tehran among the top brass as we speak. But at the same time, it won't be an overnight change, nor is Khamenei, the supreme leader, being asked to exit from office. But there could be the Revolutionary Guards who would inevitably slide into position and take over as such. That is what we've envisaged in Iranian studies over the last 1.5 years since the 12-day war with Israel. That could well occur. But the point is, as we speak, and these are unconfirmed reports I can furnish, that certain Iran diplomats at missions across the continent in Europe have been quietly asking for asylum. So that's one thing. Funds have been moved by certain regime middle-ranking elites into escrow accounts in Dubai and elsewhere. They are spiriting out their funds in case they see this as a sinking ship, which some do. So while there isn't open revolt, even at the lower or middle-ranking levels against the regime's top brass as we speak, there can be a few fissures that are faintly evident as I'm on air. And maybe that would gain traction at some point later. But it's down the road, and I wouldn't want to cross bridges until we come to it. But these aspects, again, I repeat, are unconfirmed reports, but nevertheless important to place on the scanner. The question is, what really gives? It has to be some principled dissent on the part of the police or the army, the tri-services, traditional professional forces, who would refuse to fire on the population, but then they're not being involved in firing in the first place because it's the doctrinally driven Revolutionary Guards and the Shia Basij militias, backed up with enforcements from Iraq, who have come in to gun down Iranians in cold blood. So that also must be stated in conclusion, that while there are external elements already in Iran who are aiding and abetting the killing of Iranians, the PMU units, Shia militias that Tehran has funded over the years in Iraq, They're already there on ground in Iran as we speak. Indeed, they've been there for previous protests also. So the question of opposing Mr. Trump's intervention as an external aspect is a bit rich coming from detractors of the regime.
You talked about external factors, but when you talk about this protest as a whole, it started with against the poor economy. That revolted into what it has become right now. So when you talk about these external factors, what do you mean by that?
Well, the bread and butter issues is of primary concern, as you rightly put it out, when the strikes and protests erupted on the 28th of December. But putting that aside as the immediate trigger point of the riots in question, with the currency in free fall and people's savings being evaporated, you must also look at the fact that political liberties have never really been afforded to Iranians in the fullest sense of the term. And that's not just something which a restive Gen Z or millennial population wants, which of course is true in one sense. But the fact is that this spate of revolts that took place from December 2025 saw all strata of Iranian society involved, including those who were otherwise previously regime loyalists, the pious traditional Muslim merchant class, members of the clerisy, the bureaucracy, so on and so forth, including public sector unions. This time, they too joined the strikes. And this time, what we saw, predicated on the bread and butter issues, as I must iterate, saw strikes and protests across all 31 provinces of the Islamic Republic. All 31 provinces across the strata of the population, Gen Z, millennials, senior citizens, public and private sector workers, and the like. But of course, it has not transmogrified into a nationwide revolt as we saw during 1978, leading up to the Jan 79 revolution, because that would require even more to come on board, particularly, say, the oil sector, which would paralyze the economy if oil workers went on strike. And indeed, that is what happened after September 78 in the final months leading to the Shah's downfall. Something along those lines must replicate, plus the police and the army taking a backseat or taking, as I said, a position of principled dissent that we will not shoot our own population at point blank. That's when we would see some changes and, fissures within the regime. But for that to happen, of course, we need a more larger critical mass of opposition to coalesce on the Iranian political landscape.
Right. Okay, well, that's a really interesting viewpoint that you put up there. Thank you so much for explaining to us, and thank you so much for joining us on the broadcast and giving your perspective on this.
Pleasure.